Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome viewers to another episode of Pathways to Prosperity. And tonight we're going to have a general discussion on this world of Islamic finance with our guest Shaheen Suliman, who's the head of Absa Islamic Banking, and uncover some common myths that some people may have and hopefully use it as a tool to expand the market reach of Islamic finance. Shaheen, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakallah khair for coming. Shaheen, I think maybe just to start off, the biggest myth that many people have, maybe it's because of the naming convention on how we call this thing out. The biggest myth people have is that this is something only for Muslims. Dispel this myth for us.
So Ameen, I think you're spot on. Often when we deal with staff internally, they assume because the name says Islamic banking, it's for people of the Islamic faith.
Yeah.
And it's a common misconception, right? The other thing is that when you go into like any of the branches or you see any of the branding and it says Islamic banking, the assumption again is that this product set is solely for people of the Islamic faith or Muslims. It's something that we actively try to disprove, or rather to clarify, in the sense that we say it's based on Islamic principles available to anyone.
Yeah.
And I think what we try and actively do is when we try and demystify what this Islamic banking or Islamic finance means, and people start understanding what are the principles behind that, you then start seeing a better take-up. And as you correctly point out, it's probably in the naming convention, but then the other side of the coin as well is how do we appeal to the Muslim public to say that this complies with Sharia principles without overtly calling it Islamic banking as such?
Shaheen, you're speaking about internally, I'm sure you face a similar thing as we do, is a lot of the times what we actually find as well is because they see this name Islamic or Shari'ah, it may just be a very simple practical query that they could solve themselves. But because it's got Islamic, they pass it over to the Islamic banking division.
Spot on. I mean, so I think that goes both ways, right?
Yeah.
So often we're faced with it where it's a simple query and something basic like maybe a card needs to be replaced, but it says Islamic banking customer.
Yeah.
And obviously, as you understand, we ring fence Islamic banking within our respective banks. So almost operate as a bank within a bank. And I think sometimes when a query comes through, people are apprehensive and say, okay, so the Islamic team must deal with this. So that's a bit of a challenge. But then on the other side, it could also go where sometimes a query is dealt with in an inappropriate manner. And like I mentioned, the two sides of the coins where sometimes it exposes us to risk, but you're correct in the sense that people are a bit nervous at times to deal with Islamic banking query or customers.
Shaheen, many of the viewers on channel 345 INX are non-Muslim, and you said in your opening remarks that this isn't for Muslims only, it's based on Islamic principles. Maybe for benefit of both Muslim and non-Muslim viewers, what are some of the key principles that Islamic finance is pinned on?
A very important background, I think. So Islamic finance, or rather the principles, obviously number one, the fundamental principle is interest is forbidden, but trade is allowed.
Right.
So all of our products would be constructed along those principles. So we don't give you a loan agreement where we charge you interest for the use of the money. Instead, what we do is a trade, it's based on a trade. Practical example, vehicle finance. You want to finance a car. Typically, you go to a bank, they give you a loan, and you pay interest for the use of the money. You come to the Islamic banking side, how do we do it? There's various structures, but the most common would be a lease type of arrangement, right? The bank purchases the car, leases it to you over a period of time, charges you for the use of the car. At the end of the term, ownership of the car transfers to you. So that's the first principle in terms of interest versus trade. The second one, obviously, Islamic finance, we will not get involved in, let me call it, typical sin type of industry. So gambling, pornography, weaponry, etc. So Islamic principles prohibit that. And maybe the third point would be risk, in terms of risk and certainty. So our contracts include an element of certainty, so both parties that are contracting understand what it is that they are contracting for or contracting to. And then with regards to risk, there's an element of risk taking based on the principles of trade. There's some risk that's being taken by the customer as such. So, to make sure that the return that they're receiving is based on an underlying trade transaction.
Shane, I've got two more discussion points that I maybe want to get into. To the non-Muslim customer, we've seen on our side, we've discussed it at an industry level as well, that over the past few years, we have seen non-Muslim clients taking up these products. And obviously, for the most part, the understanding would be that interest isn't necessarily prohibited in other religions, although we know that those prohibitions do exist. Maybe not as explicitly mentioned as it is within the Quran. But in your opinion, in your experience as a practitioner in the industry, what would you say are some of the key elements that attract non-Muslim clients to Islamic finance products?
So, I mean, interestingly enough, there's quite a few things. So let me first start off. I started speaking about training internal staff because they typically are the face to the customer, right? And what I started noticing is that as soon as you demystify Islamic finance, explain the principles or rather the attributes of the product internally, we actually have quite a bit of staff that take up an Islamic product and they aren't Muslim.
Yeah.
So number one for me would be the attribute of the product that we push to the customer. What makes it different? Because at the end of the day, while it's based on Islamic principles, economically does it make sense to me or not, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we actively promote to say that if you take product XYZ, if it's on the investment side, these are the returns that you are eligible for. If it's on the financing side, this is the certainty in the contract. And let me use another practical example. What customers like, what customers like is the sense of certainty. So back to my vehicle finance example, at the end of every single month, this is the installment that you'll pay towards the bank for the vehicle that you're renting from the bank, right? It's that certainty of contract that I can budget irrespective of what happens in the outside world or the economic environment. This is the certainty that I have in my contract or my agreement with the bank. So basically, to summarize, would be the element of certainty, the economic benefit that we're getting through. And like most of the banks, the rewards that customer gets, right? So as an Islamic customer, you're not disadvantaged as a result of that, but you are able to get the same rewards that a normal customer gets. But let me maybe just emphasize my point by giving you a few actual cases, right? We ran a competition about a year or so ago in terms of taking up an Islamic account. So we revamped our entry-level Islamic account, one of the cheapest accounts that were available, and we gave a prize up to 100,000 rands. Interestingly enough, 60% of the winners were non-Muslim.
Okay.
That's an interesting set, and I was very surprised. So we actually caused some of the people to say, but we had a bit of a prize giving and a handover of the prize money, and we asked some of the winners, now, you aren't Muslim, why did you take up this specific product? Number one was the ease of getting the product. Number two was the pricing point of that specific product. And number three was just the ability to use it. And I think it was maybe the conversation that happened at the point of sale that explained to the customer what this product set was about and did not discriminate against a customer that's non-Muslim taking up an Islamic banking product. So I thought that was quite an interesting stat.
Shane, thanks for that. And I think it goes nicely as a segue into the last discussion point that I wanted to chat to you about. We know that historically as an industry, and not just specific to South Africa, but globally, the Islamic finance industry started off very reactionary in nature. We had certain macroeconomic events that triggered the necessity for Islamic finance institutions to become institutionalized within a formal banking. But where we are now as a global industry, you're seeing us reach a certain level of maturity, a certain level of sophistication. And many of our consumers and viewers out there may think that Islamic finance is just this old archaic way of doing things. They think about the murabaha transactions where you must sign a contract and email an invoice and get confirmation back. Maybe as a closing discussion for this episode is give our viewers that hope. What's happening in the world of Islamic finance globally? what innovations are we seeing coming through? Because you're touching on key points, that it was the customer experience that actually sold the product to them. So maybe as a means of boosting confidence to our viewers, just some general comments on where the Islamic finance industry is going globally.
So, I mean, you raise such an important point around innovation, right? So, yes, Islamic finance may be based on traditional principles, but as banks, we need to cater for our customers. And customers in the day and age that we're living in with instant gratification expect certain things to be done instantaneously. There's specific customer needs, and typically what we like to do is listen to the needs of the customer. And I give you some basic examples again. We had customers saying, yes, we understand that we live within the South African market, but how do you give us exposure to offshore investments? So we said, okay, when you look at the wealth customer, typically something that's not available in the South African market is a structured note. So yes, there's Islamic principles that we apply to something like that, but the practicality of it is now you're exposing a South African customer to an offshore investment in a Sharia compliant manner, right? So that's solving for a need of a specific customer. You touched on something else. You spoke about a Muraba contract. Now, typically and historically, it was quite cumbersome. You importing goods, or you're buying local goods, you need to fax or email or scan an invoice through. Once the invoice, the wholesale and buyback process, it was quite cumbersome. So we looked at those processes and said, how do we automate it? How do we digitize it? So how do you upload invoices? How does payment and acceptance happen digitally? So I think from a product point of view, yes, there's a lot of innovation across the industry in terms of introducing new products on a regular basis, but not so much for the sake of introducing more products, but as customer needs evolve, we need to make sure that we cater for the customer needs. In terms of consumption of those products, we need to make sure that we are able to provide a channel and a mechanism to those customers to be able to interact with the bank as seamlessly and as smoothly as possible. So I think it's a combination of those two that make it quite exciting.
I think my parting comment on that, Shane, if you allow, is one of the greatest advantages I think the consumer of Islamic finance products has in South Africa is we operate largely as window operations, which are Islamic finance window operations in conventional banks. And I think what that does give the consumer as an advantage is it gives them access to all of the latest tech available. And to your point, the channel that the consumer engages with us on. Shaheen, Jazakallah khair so much for coming onto the show. Inshallah, we'll speak again soon. Until next time, viewers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.